بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we know that the khabar could be a mufrad, meaning a noun, just a noun, one unit, or it could be a jumla, right? That could be a jumla fi'liya, or that could be a jumla ismiya. Okay, now we have, it says والثالث الظرف. Okay, so here it says الظرف and jar majrur. That is exactly the same thing. Okay, we will often refer to a jar majrur as a ظرف. Okay, we'll often say the ظرف, meaning the jar majrur, the same thing. Okay, so or we might refer to them as the sifa. We might refer to the ظرف or the jar majrur as a sifa. So write it down. You might see a jar majrur somewhere being referred to as a dharf, and you're like, where's the dharf? Oh, it's a jar majrur. You might refer to it as a sifa as well. Okay? So, in order to understand what the discussion here, we have to understand the nature of amal. So let's start with the dharf because it's easier. Right? You say نمت قبل الظهر تحت السقف عند الدار. Okay? So what is the dharf doing? The dharf is explaining where and when the verb is happening. You couldn't have a dharf without a verb. That would be impossible. That's like having a maf'ul bihi without a verb. So you have to have the dharf has to be muta'alliq, has to be connected, muta'alliq. Muta'alliq is like the equivalent of saying the maf'ul bihi of, or the maf'ul fihi of, because the maf'ul fihi is the dharf. Okay? So whenever you have a dharf, you always have a verb or a verb-like word that is muta'alliq to. So أنا نائم قبل الظهر عند البيت تحت السقف فوق الأرض. Right? All of these things are muta'alliq then to نائم. Okay? They were either muta'alliq to the verb anamu or nimtu, or ana na'im, or an-nawmu, right? Could be muta'alliq to a dharf. Does that make sense? Muhammad Hashir and Muhammad Amin?
Yes.
Right. So that's what's happening. So therefore, whenever we see a dharf, we know that somewhere around there is a verb-like word. There is a fi'l, there is an ism fa'il, there's an ism maf'ul, there's a dharf, there's a masdar. Something must be there, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Okay? We come along and we see the sentence, Zaydun andak. Zayd is at your house. And we're stuck. Because suddenly, it's almost like عندك is almost متعلق to Zayd, right? And you can't be متعلق to Zayd. That wouldn't make any sense. So, so what's going on here? So we're going to say, aha. Is there something implied here? Like if I said, for example, أنا جالس هنا وأنت هناك, meaning أنت جالس هناك. Which case that's easy. That's like saying, for example, أنا أكلت هذا وأنت ذاك, meaning وأنت أكلت ذاك. So that's easy, right? You have a context, a verbal context, right? You've said certain words that it's obvious that certain words are implied. Okay, certain words are implied. So now I know that the dharf is muta'alliq to that verb, right? Or to that ism fa'il or ism maf'ul or dharf, whatever. It's easy. What if there is no context, or the context doesn't imply that? Right? If you're just referring to like he just is, I'm not trying to say that he's sitting there or he's eating there, right? So in which case, then we say it is متعلق to an implied word that has that general meaning. Okay? So he says, if you look here, so he says, والثالث الظرف نحو زيد عندك فزيد مبتدأ وعندك ظرف مكان متعلق بمحذوف وجوبا تقديره مستقر أو استقر. So there's a number of things here. Number one, محذوف, something implied. We just saw that. أنا نائم هنا هو نائم هناك أما أنت فعند زيد. Right? That, what does that mean? I'm sleeping here, he's sleeping over there. As for you, in front of Zaid's house, i.e., you're going to sleep in front of Zaid's house or at Zaid's house. So there's a context, and there's obviously a specific action, which is a noun. So the implied word is na'im. But what if there isn't a specific action that's being implied? If it's just general being, they refer to it as al-kawn al-am. Al-kawn meaning just, right? It's not al-kawn khas. Kawn khas is being and doing a specific thing. Sleeping, eating, drinking. But al-kawn al-am is just being, right? Just being. So he says this is mahdhuf wujuban, right? Why? Because if I mentioned it, it would mean something else. If I said ana ka'inun, right? I'm existing, that means something else. Right? I'm not trying to say that I'm existing. We're not trying to say that I will be, right? Aka'inun hadha, will this actually happen? Will it be one day? I'm not trying to say that. So even if I use the word ka'in, right? Even if I use the word ka'in, right? Do you use that in Tunisian? Ka'in khubs? Like means mawjood, right?
No, that's
Comfortable.
Moroccan. I
Mm,
think. Yeah.
okay. But anyway, so ka'in, right? They say that like is there, right? That's kind of like a mawjood, like is it found? We're not even saying that. We're just trying to. So when you say ka'in, you mean structurally there is something there. All right. It's exactly like ذهب, which has a ضمير ضمير يعني الضمير مستتر ضمير مستتر. I won't say وجوبا here because that's something else. ضمير مستتر تقديره هو. So could I say maybe ذهب هو? No, ذهب هو is just توكيد. That's different. ذهب هو means he went. I'm not saying ذهب هو. I'm just saying ذهب. So structurally, there's a ضمير. That's all it is. Okay. How do you say that ضمير? Oh, you can't say it. What do you mean you can't say it? Well, if you said it, you would have a difficult and different analysis now. So all we're saying is structurally it is there. Okay. Because why? The dharf has to do ta'alaq to something. It has to have an amil. The dharf has an amil, right? Something is making the dharf go into that state, right? And he says, تقديره مستقر, right? So what he's saying is, when you see a jar majrur or a dharf, what you're really seeing is the effects or the footprints or the lawazim, the things that are negate the muqtadayat, the things that are necessitated by some kind of mufrad. So in reality, it's not a second category. If you say taqdirhu mustaqirrun, what you're really saying is category one. That's what you're saying. So you say أنا في الدار, أنا كائن في الدار, أنا مستقر في الدار, أنا موجود في الدار. What does that mean? That means that مستقر is the مبتدأ, and مستقر is a mufrad, so it's category number one. Okay, it's category number one. Okay, أو استقر, right? أو استقر, in which case you have is category number two, because now you have زيد قتل هنا, زيد رؤية هنا, زيد استقر هنا, right? So now استقر meaning to be, or ثبت, or whatever it is, وجد, يوجد, whatever it is, um, it's now a jumla now. So زيد استقر هو الجملة من الفعل استقر والفاعل هو خبر المبتدأ. Right? So now we have a jumla as a the sentence the خبر is a jumla. Right? وذلك المحذوف خبر مبتدأ. So now the question is why didn't you just call it category number one, number two? Like why didn't you put the jar al majrur as a subcategory of number one and number two? Like why all this thing? The answer is because it's not that simple. And the jar the majrur, as you mentioned, we call them a sifa. It's called a sifa. A sifa is a kind of an old term from an ism fa'il, right? It's like an old term for ism fa'il. So the jar majrur and the dharf grammatically, they do lots of things that sentences do, and it's really kind of somewhere in between, right? So if you think about, I'm also referring to random science things, but an electron, right? So an electron apparently has a mass, right? It weighs something, so therefore it's mass. Yeah, but it behaves like a wave, so it's like energy. Okay, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is it's not really A or B. That's the problem. Like you can't just say, oh yeah, it's just mass or it's just energy, because it's actually sufficiently more complex that when you're really talking about it, you can't really put it in the category of just mass or just energy. That's not really fair, and that's an oversimplification. Okay? So the same thing here is the dar for the jar of majrur, they can kind of behave like a verb, right? Like I can say things like afillahi shakkun, afillahi shakkun, and say it's almost like saying ayujadu shakkun. So it's so afillahi shakkun, shakkun is actually the fa'il of a verb. So it's kind of like it's kind of like a verb. You can use it in a silatul mawsul, right? Alladhi fihi. So fihi is almost like a sentence. So that's why we call it shibhu jumla. It's kind of like a sentence, right? It almost works like a sentence. Um, and that's why they will say things like this word, this jar majrur is muta'alliqun bil which doesn't really make any sense. So if I said ana indaka or من أجل استضافتكم, right? I am at your house because you invited me. So they say من أجل استضافتكم متعلق بالظرف. Just like متعلق to عندك. How can you be متعلق to عندك? And عندك is متعلق to a كائن. But they say basically they'll treat it as if the كائن isn't there, right? So or they say this word here is the fa'il of this sifa. You're like, when what's the sifa that you're referring to? I the jar majrur, i.e., it is a fa'il of the implied amil of the jar majrur or dharf that is there. Does that make sense? So they'll treat the ka'in or kana or mustaqirrun or istaqarra as if it's there and if it's not there at the same time. Sometimes they treat it as there, sometimes it's not. Right? Some even treat it as a verb proper. Like it almost has, it's almost the equivalent of a verb, in which case they'll say like Zaydun fid dari huwa, because if it's like it has a huwa, just like as if it was Zaydun yajlis, right? And it's there's a damir of the jar majrur itself, which is a bit weird, right? So we can see that it's not so simple to just say, oh, it's category one or category two. It's not so simple. Okay. But as you mentioned, the dharf is always muta'alliq to something. So in reality, it's almost like saying, what did you eat? Say, أنا أكلت كذا. Okay, what did he eat? هو أكل كذا. And as for Zayd, oh, زيد هذا, i.e. زيد أكل هذا. That's what's happening on a on a deeper level, but it's not so simple like that. Does that make sense? So that's why it's mahdhuf wujuban. It's mahdhuf wujuban because if it was jawazan, that's easy. It's like, okay, right? It's not a big deal, right? The ulama, they say al-mahdhuf biquwwat al-malfuz, right? When you drop something, it's effectively there, right? You can still does the same kind of thing, right? But here we're talking about mahdhuf wujuban, like it's so vague and so irreplaceable, right, that you couldn't actually replace it ever. If that makes sense. Like you couldn't actually ever put a word there. And if you couldn't ever put a word there, then that's very different to saying, for example, it's different to say like, what time is it? It's 5 o'clock, meaning it is 5 o'clock. It's very different when you could do a taqdeer of it and you couldn't do a taqdeer of it. If you can't do a taqdeer of it, then we are really looking at replacing the structure of the grammar, but not replacing any implied word. If that makes sense. Okay, so you both of you following? Muhammad Hashir? Muhammad Hashir, you there? Okay. And then he says, Al-Rabi' al-Jar Majroor, which is exactly the same thing. No difference. Right? As we mentioned, we will sometimes refer to the Jar Majroor as a dharf. Right? So the Jar Majroor then, in our mind, the Jar Majroor, almost without exception, is basically going to be one of three things. Okay, it's going to be one of three things. It is going to be a what they call مفعول به غير صريح, right? A indirect way of giving a verb a maf'ul bihi because it couldn't do it otherwise. So marartu Zaydan. No, Habib, you cannot say marartu Zaydan. Okay, what do I say then? Okay, say marartu bi Zaydin or marartu ala Zaydin. Okay, I was just trying to connect the word marra to Zayd. That's all. So I can't do it directly. So okay, marartu bi Zaydin. Okay, fine. Right? So that's what's called غير مفعول به غير صريح. It's basically مفعول به. And therefore therefore the jar the majroor could also become the na'ib al-fa'il, just like the maf'ul bihi could become the na'ib al-fa'il. But but you couldn't do it directly. Okay? Or it's a dharf غير صريح. Like I wanted to say, for example, nimtu al-bayta. Like I wanted to connect sleeping and the house. So nimtu al-bayta. You're like, Habib, you can't say that. Okay, why? Because when you have a dharf, right, dharf makan, it can't be khas, right? It can't have specific limits. So your house has specific limits, right? Like you stepped inside your house, outside your house, you can't do that. So you can't say nimtu al bayta. Okay, so what do I say then? Nimtu fil bayti, bil bayti, ala al bayti, taht al bayti, something like that. You can't use bait as a dharf in itself. Okay, good. Okay, so what did you do? You just used the jar just to pull. It's just like a rope between two things, right? This car couldn't pull this car directly because they couldn't connect. They didn't have. So what did you do? You use a pulley, you use a rope, you use a pulley, you use something, right? You use something in order to connect the two things. So the car is pulling the car, but not directly, right? So it could be a مفعول به غير صريح, it could be a ظرف غير صريح, or it could be مفعول من أجله غير صريح, right? So I say sumtu Allah. You're like, that doesn't make sense, Habibi. Why? Because you can't say that in Arabic. Okay, why? Because you can't make the word Allah be a maf'ul min ajlihi. Okay, well, why? Well, we have different definitions of a maf'ul min ajlihi, but it's not really an emotion, is it? Usually it's going to be an emotion, right? So ihtiram, I can say qumtu or sumtu khawfan min Allah, raja'an fillah, right? Raja' al-thawab, right? But you can't make Allah your maf'ul bihi. That's not the emotion that made you do the action. Okay, so how would I say it then? Say sumtu lillahi. Okay. So now basically lillahi is not what you did, nor is it when you did it, but it is why you did it. So the jar al-majroor that explains why, that is called maf'ul bihi ghayr sarih. And it's only there because you couldn't explain it in another way. So with that in mind, we always know that the jar al-majroor is basically a fake maf'ul bihi or a wannabe maf'ul bihi or a wannabe dharf or wannabe maf'ul min ajlihi. And so therefore it's always going to be going back to some kind of verb, right? So whatever we say about the dharf basically is exactly the same as the jar al-majroor, with some exceptions. Does that make sense? My apologies. Exactly at the time of the class, somebody decided to mow behind my lawn, behind my house, but what can I do? Inshallah, my voice is clear?
Yes.
Okay. Muhammad Hashi, can you hear me? Okay. So that is that discussion. So we have an issue then, right? We're not going to go on to taqdeem and ta'khir. That's another discussion, right? There's many other discussions here. But we might find that the mubtada khabar are reversed, right? Muhammad Aminun anta, right? Or anta Muhammad Amin, right? Tunisiyun anta, right? You could turn it around, right? But sometimes, as we know, that we could have a sentence with a mubtada and a fa'il, right? You could say things like adhahibun antum, where antum is the fa'il of the mubtada, dhahib. Okay? So now that we know that the jar majroor or the dharf are basically pointing to an ism fa'il or something like that, then it means we can have the self-same discussion when we have a sentence that begins, particularly if it's a question or a negation, right? A question or a negation, and it begins with a jar majroor. So I say, afil bayti anta. I can analyze this in two ways. afil bayti khabar muqaddam, anta mubtada muakhar, not a problem. أنت في البيت أفي البيت أنت, not a problem. Okay? But I could also analyze it as مبتدا and فاعل. So أفي البيت أنت أكائن, that's a مبتدا. في البيت متعلق بكائن. أنت فاعل of كائن. Right? Um, uh, أمن بريطانيا أنتم. I can analyze it as مبتدأ مقدم and خبر مقدم and مبتدأ مؤخر, right? I've just inverted it. أأنتم من بريطانيا أم من بريطانيا أنتم, easy. Or I can also analyze it as مبتدأ and فاعل. So أكائن, that's my مبتدأ, من بريطانيا متعلق بكائن, أنتم فاعل of كائن. Okay? Does that make sense, Muhammad Amin?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So now we're going to go on. We have the structure of the mubtada and khabar. Now what we're going to do is everything that we just said, that whole discussion, everything that we just said, we are now going to do that, but just tweak it. Okay? So we could have, we're going to have a mubtada and khabar, and we're just going to change the relationship between them a little bit, right? With something with ism kana wa akhawatiha, right? So it says, liyu'lam. So when you're reading to the sheikh, right, you're reading a text like this, and it says, i'lam, you don't say that to the sheikh, i'lam, right? It's not haram, of course. You're reading the text, but you say, فَلْيُعْلَمْ, right? So if you're reading to me, you say, فَلْيُعْلَمْ أَنَّكَ, right? That's how you say, فَلْيُعْلَمْ, let it be known, as opposed to, i'lam, hey, sheikh, know this, right? That's not, it's not adab. Even if the sheikh doesn't mind, right? There's a key concept. Some shuyukh will demand adab and more, right? They'll be like, whoa, it's kind of jalali. You know, they're like, the way that they interact with you is very Like they're like that. Okay, that's fine. Sometimes they might actually be rude or condescending, and that's you have to be patient with that, just like with our parents, right? Parents might be rude to us sometimes and actually be cruel somewhat, as long as it's not recurrent and you're like emotionally destroyed or it's physically or financially harmful. We have to be patient with that, right? Same thing with our shuyukh are like our parents, right? So the adab with them is like our parents. And so similarly with our parents sometimes might not demand adab, right? They don't mind certain things, but that doesn't mean that we should. That's okay to do that, right? Same thing with the teacher. The teacher be super chill, right? You know, some shuyukh are very much like that. I don't know how like Moroccan or Tunisian shuyukh are, but like Mauritanian shuyukh, very chill, super chill, right? And so, things can change a little bit, but sometimes there is adab even if the other person doesn't require it or doesn't ask for it or doesn't respond or doesn't even notice it, right? There's still adab that is due there, right? Because we're not in our relationships with other people, we are not talking to people, we're talking to Allah through people. So it's irrelevant. So I'm not talking to your parents. I'm not talking to your teacher. You're talking to because you're talking to the thing as a little Kaaba, right? Like the Kaaba is not the bricks. The Kaaba is not these things. This Kaaba is something else, right? It's something. What it means is something else totally. So your respect for the teacher is totally irrespective of the person of the teacher. It is the point of the teacher. This is a person is a tool for me to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I have to respect that. And not respecting the tool to worship Allah is tantamount to not respecting Allah Himself, right? So it's one relationship. Many people, may Allah protect us, they don't do that. So they maybe, for example, respect the teacher out of hero worship, right? Like they're kind of sucking up to the teacher, which is not worshiping Allah in reality. And then they might be disrespectful to somebody else, or they don't understand the nature of the knowledge. So then it's all messed up. So it's very, very important that these are all games. Worship and studies and work and life, these are all games for us. We're playing a game to develop our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so we can't forget the game because that's the whole point. It's not about memorizing Quran, it's about putting in effort for something that is precious to Allah and special. It's not about studying fiqh, it's about being very careful about what Allah wants and Allah doesn't want, and trying one's best to make sure that you do what Allah wants and other people do what Allah wants, right? It's not about this pronoun, that pronoun. It's like trying your best to understand things, right? And it's very, very easy as a talib ilm or even as a teacher or anybody to lose the whole sight of every single thing, right? And even some shuyukh will be like that. Some shuyukh will be like that as well. Their actual world is حب العلم, not حب الله. احترام العلم, not احترام Allah, right? And that can spread to the student, which is very dangerous, right? So they don't really, you know, they don't connect. So we though, whatever happens, we always have to say, what is the point of this thing? What are we doing, right? What are we doing? So here you said the teacher notices, doesn't notice, and you say, فَلْيُعْلَمْ. I'm not doing this for the teacher to notice or be impressed or unimpressed, or the teacher to be offended or not offended. I'm doing this because I'm standing before Allah and I'm speaking to Allah and saying, Oh Allah, I want it to be known, as opposed to saying to Allah, i'lam. You don't say to Allah, i'lam, right? You would say to Allah, Ya Allah, I want it to be known. فَلْيُعْلَمْ, right? Okay, so it says اعلم أن كان وأخواتها ترفع الاسم وتنصب الخبر وهي ثلاثة عشر فعلا. So these are somewhat equivalent to what we call linking verbs in English, right? Linking verbs in English. So I say, for example, yeah, I used to be buddies with him, but then our relationship turned sour. So you look at the word turned sour and you say, could you just have the verb turn? Like, could the verb just be turn? So, that doesn't make any sense. So, sour is not like the object of turn, right? The sentence without sour would not make any sense. In a sentence, when you want to use that verb turn, you have to say, the relationship turned sour. The exam, I don't know. It turned, meaning it became X. You have to have something after it. So what we're talking about is a verb that structurally does not accept anything other than three units in its sentence. Because kana is a complex version of the mubtada khabar. And the mubtada khabar does not accept a sentence without two units, right? So you have to have those two units. You bring in the kana, now you have to have three units. So it is a word, these words are brought in and they are, all they're doing is tweaking and bending and giving nuance to the relationship between the mubtada and khabar, right? So I'm saying Zaid is my teacher, or rather he was. Kana Zaidun mudarrisan, right? He is a teacher, or he was a teacher. So, you said by default that that's in the past now, not in the present, or it's in the future, or it still is, right? Or it became like that in the morning, or it came like that in the evening, or it remained like that, or whatever it is, okay? And so you're giving a tweak to these things. You're giving a tweak to these things, and so they don't accept something else, right? Why is that important? Because we will also see most of these words, if not all of these words, used in a different sentence, in a different grammatical sense. So there's a difference in English between saying the relationship turned sour and he turned. So he turned, that's a complete sentence. He turned around, he turned, right? This looks fishy, as opposed to this looks, right? So this is a cat and the cat looks. Okay, it looks right, looks left. But this looks fishy. That's a different use of the word. One is a linking verb that connects the word it and fishy in a certain relationship that A is B or it seems to be B, right? As opposed to A is B. And the other look means he physically does something, right? So most of these words could be used another way, right? So Sara, I don't know if it can be used to become. Like in English, we can use the verb to become. We can use it as a verb, right? Like now he has become. You can say that, but that's not very common, right? Um, Later you can't use no, it doesn't make any sense. But bata, right? Bittu, that means I slept at night, right? So like in that hadith, the aina batat yaduhu, right? You don't have to treat it as bata, as in aina batat yaduhu. It could be aina kanat yaduhu, right? You could so it could be where was it at night, right? Where was it at night? Or what was it doing at night? But it could also just I guess you can't use it like that because bata would apply to a person. But ana bittu, like I slept at night. You can say that. Adha, I'm not really sure if you can use it by itself. But asbaha, you say asbahtu. I have entered the morning. Asbahtu. So I'm not saying that I'm sick in the morning, or I'm healthy in the morning, I'm happy in the morning. I'm not trying to connect two things about me in the morning. I'm just saying asbahtu, right? Asbahna wa asbah al-mulk, right? So if you say asbahna, full stop, wa asbah al-mulku lillahi, there's something else. That means the first asbaha is ana asbahtu. I have entered the morning. That's all I have done. I have now entered the morning. Wa asbah mulku lillah. Ah, that's the different one. That's the and the whole universe, all everything that Allah owns has entered while being in a state of being owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's different. That's the one that we're talking about here, the asbaha that's kind of like has a subject and mubtada khabar or ism al khabar. But it can be used another way. Ka'in can be used in its non ناقص state. So you say كن فيكون يعني أوجده فأوجد, right? He brought it into existence. and then it existed, right? So kana can just mean to exist, right? أكائن هذا? Will this happen, right? Will this happen? كان مطر. There was some rain. So all you mean is rain existed. You're not trying to say that some rain was heavy and some rain, you're just saying it existed. So that's called a normal verb. A normal verb is you just have a verb, fi'l and a fa'al, and that's it. But these linking verbs, these af'al naqisa, they are naqisa in that they need something else. There's always minimum of three things as umad, as the pillars of the sentence. Okay, the pillars of the sentence. So you have to have kana zaydun tawilan. You need to have the three units, otherwise there's no sentence. Amsa zaydun maridan. Right? He got sick in the afternoon. أصبح وأصبح مريضا. Right? وأضحى مريضا. وظل مريضا. وبات مريضا. وصار مريضا. والآن الحمد لله ليس مريضا. Go ahead, Muhammad.
Why couldn't we say the khabar is حال for الفعل الناقص?
Oh yeah. It's funny. I kind of taught myself Arabic, Muhammad, and so I looked at it like that. Like he
Yeah.
was while being that thing, a hal. Um, to Why couldn't you do that? Let me try to think. Why couldn't you do that? Um, oh yeah, you can't do that because let's look at Laysa for example, right? ليس هذا جيدا. So are you trying to say that هذا did Laysa while being good? No, that doesn't make any sense, right? But أصبح, right? أصبح مريضا. That sounds like a hal, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference, right? So I did this while doing this, right? But let's look at bata sajidan, right? That means bata sajidan, he did sujood all night. That's different. So bata, he spent the night. While he was doing this action of spending the night, he was doing sujood. So the core of the sentence is bata zaydun. And you'll just give me extra information. Here, this is not extra information. This is the information. Does that make sense? So there is a difference. Hal is not always hal is sometimes necessary. It's not like, but by default the hal is just something extra. So it doesn't that so there is a big difference. Bata sajidan, he did sujood all night versus bata wa athna'a, uh, whatever the verb is, baytihi, bayatihi. I don't know what I think it's mabitihi. Wa athna'a mabitihi kana sajidan. That's not right. That's not what you mean, right? So it is that it is originally coming from, or that is coming from huwa sajid, and then bata sajidan, dhalla sajidan, sara sajidan. The structure is mubtada and khabar. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Right. Similarly, for example, أصبحت والناس صيام. Right? That's a hal. I entered the morning. Okay, what state was it? What was happening? Oh, and I found everybody was fasting. That's hal, right? دخلت المدينة وثمة مجاعة. Okay, that's a hal. وثمة مجاعة. Structurally, that's very different to uh, أصبحت مريضا, right? That's very, very different. Okay, so the hal, for example, it doesn't have to always connect to you, right? Whereas here it does because you're talking about mubtada and khabar. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Another question, Muhammad Amin, is this is important. Is sometimes what they will do is they'll analyze something just because it makes structural sense, not because it actually makes sense, right? So the discussion we're having right now is what is the difference in meaning? Sometimes what the Nahwiyin will do is they'll say, oh, the structure is this, the i'rab is this, but that doesn't actually make it makes structural sense, like it fits something that already exists and it kind of connects together, but that's not what it actually means, right? So I'll give example of the hal. You say, for example, you'll see this shop, okay, and it will say um, uh, I don't know, uh, محمد أمين للمواد الاستهلاكية, right? So you say, what's the i'rab of that? So, well, هذا, the shop is called Muhammad Amin. So هذا Muhammad Amin. And للمواد الاستهلاكية is a hal. But that doesn't really make any sense, right? So they'll say the jar majrur is a hal because it's coming after a definite word. And so like it makes sense structurally, but doesn't really make any sense like in terms of the meaning, right? So your question is very important, right? Because the whole point of i'rab is understand the meaning. So if it has the same meaning, why don't you analyze it like that? But so just be aware. Sometimes grammarians will say something and say, "Oh, it's like this." Like that's not really the same meaning, though, is it? Right? Here, though, there is a fundamental difference between hal and fi'l naqis. There is a difference. Okay. خير. So some of these dama, for example, ما دامت السماوات والأرض. Right? As long as the heavens and the earth last. As opposed to ما دمت هناك, as long as you're here. That's totally different, right? Dama, tama, as long as it lasts, right? As long as it is X, that's dama. That's the other dama. Okay, so he says, وهذه الأفعال على ثلاثة أقسام ما يعمل بلا شرط وهو ثمانية من كان إلى ليس. So they work without condition, right? So it's not really true, but basically true, right? So كان, so also كان يكون كن is متصرف as well, right? أمسي أمسي أصبح يصبح, right? You can kind of do what you want. ليس is not متصرف, so you can't say يليس, right? That doesn't make any sense. So when you say no شرط at all, you can't. So lace is a bit of a funny word because it looks like a past tense verb, kind of, but it's present, right? And if you wanted to put it into the past, you're saying لم يكن or ما كان, right? It's kind of a bit weird. So ما يعمل بلا شرط وهو ثمانية من كان إلى ليس, fine. وما يشترط فيه نفي أو شبهه. This concept شبه النفي usually is going to be a question, a prohibition, or a negation, right? So when we look at the istithna, and we say things like uh, لم يجئ لم يجئ إلا زيد, or li or لا يجئ إلا زيد. That's a nahi, right? Let nobody come apart from Zayd. لا يجئ إلا زيد. Or هل جاء إلا زيد. It's the same structure. So these are certain structures called istithna mufarragh that works with a question or a negation or prohibition. It's the same kind of thing there, right? Here it's a similar kind of thing. Nafyun or nahyon. Istifham, I'm not sure if it really applies here, right? Wallahu a'lam. ما يشترط فيه نفي أو شبهه وهو زال. So زال يزول or زال, right? That means something else. But ما زال, still, right? ما زلت هنا ما زلت هنا, you're still here. That's different. You have to have ما زال or ما يزال, right? وما فتئ وما انفك وما برح, right? So here, when it says شبهه, just one example of that where it's kind of different is with Fatiha, right? In Surah Yusuf, تالله تفتأ تذكر يوسف, أي? So that qasam counts as the thing here. تفتأ تذكر Yusuf. You will keep remembering Yusuf, right? So there's no la, but the qasam counted there. تالله تفتأ تذكر Yusuf. Okay? Okay. خير. So usually speaking, they have to say like لم يزل or لا يزول لا يزال or ما يزال or من فك or ما زال, etc. Right? So there has to be usually a negation before it. وما يشترط فيه تقدم ما المصدرية الظرفية, which is specifically so that's specific. So what is ما الظرف مصدرية الظرفية? So we have ما المصدرية. ما المصدرية is a ما, one of the uses of ما, which gets the sentence after it and turns it into a masdar. Okay? So ذلك بما عصوا. That is because they disobeyed. ذلك بما عصوا. ما عصوا is the same as asyan. ذلك بمعصيتهم. ذلك بعصيانهم. So the ma turns the sentence, the jumla, into a mufrad. Okay? يعجبني ما تفعل. Right? ما يعجبني ما تفعله. That means الذي. Right? There's a ma that means الذي. Right? يعجبني ما تفعله أي الذي تفعله. That's easy. That's الذي. But for example, يعجبني ما تنام. Right? I'm happy that you're sleeping because you need to sleep, bro. Right? يعجبني ما تنام. So that's clearly not doesn't mean الذي. That doesn't mean الذي. That means يعجبني نومك. Right? So that's a ma that comes along and gets a sentence and it turns that sentence into a mufrad, which is we'll call it ma masdari. Okay, ma masdariya. It has a particular usage as well where that masdar has a specific role, which is it's a dharf, right? And you'll frequently see ma lam, right? For example, وهذا جائز ما لم ينص على خلافه, right? As long as he doesn't specifically say otherwise, right? As long as he doesn't do something, right? So that's very common. So what does that mean is, for example, you say هذا جائز ما لم ينص على خلافه. What does it mean? هذا جائز مدة عدم نصه على خلافه. That's what it means, right? ما لم, right? Or uh, uh, um, or you could say, for example, سأنام هنا ما تنام هنا, as long as, right? Usually it's with negation, but it could be like that, right? So it's a specific use of the ma masdariya. Ma masdariya specifically meaning during that time. So there is one of these things, which is ma dama, which means you only use it in a very particular context. You couldn't just use it by itself. You can't just say dama zaydun maridan. Zayd remains sick. You can't say that. It only exists in as long as Zayd is sick. That's a specific structure, right? Right. So it's what's going to happen then is that ma dama is going to be a dharf, and that dharf is going to be muta'alliq to something before it, right? سأبقى هنا ما دمت مريضا. I will remain here as long as you are sick, right? So it's got two things. Number one, it has a ma before it, which means as long as. And the second thing is it has a khabar, right? As opposed to ma damat samawatu wal ard. That means as long as the heavens and the earth exist. That's a different verb. So that means as long as the first part is there, right? But the second part is not there. There's no khabar. So that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about this ma dama right? Which meant as long as A is B, or as long as A was B. Does that make sense? وهو دائما
Yeah.
خاصة, right? And then he's going to give examples, inshallah. So we'll stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.